In this episode, we discuss the nature of evil as those spirits that deceive one's mind. Welcome to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Shannon Ray, and I'm joined by my special guest, Ryan Scott. How's it going, Ryan?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So today's episode, we are going to continue our series on the concept of evil and ethics by discussing the concept of evil. And we want to use an example of a conversation that was had in the comment section of one of our previous videos to just demonstrate what we're talking about when we're discussing the concepts of evil. So recently in the episode that we posted, what's it called? In the episode we posted of Physicists Formulate the Objective Truth of Identity. That's a title that's meant to get people to click. I mean, I guess also we are claiming that's what we're doing. But in that comment section, I had a whole conversation with a computer science professor, and he was making claims that we don't know what we're talking about and everything we're saying is absurd and things like that. But the conversation went in a direction such that this person just so happened to demonstrate a lot of the traits that we have been characterizing as being part of someone who is functioning out of a delusional state, or more like they have sufficiently disconnected themselves from the truth and from themselves such that they're interacting out of an emotional state that is inherently disconnected from reality. And it's precisely the nature of evil, or it's part of the nature of evil, that the more you work out of a delusional mode, or you lie to yourself, or you're not honest with yourself and what you're thinking, the more you get cast into this space, and the more you are someone who promotes ideas that are antithetical to ethics. But I saw you made a face, so what was that reaction to?
So I want us to really hammer in on this point, because I think that canonically, historically, what happens is a type of oscillation between generating ideals and ideas. And the way that we are framing this analysis is just doing that oscillation without focusing on like the truth of the matter. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I think instead of us saying that this person is standing in a delusional state with respect to reality, mm-hmm. what we should say is this individual, there is evidence in the way this individual is conducting himself textually that suggests that he has subordinated that aspect of reality, which I suppose has objective structure, to his subjective nature.
Yes.
And the reason why it's essential that we reframe this in this manner is because we absolutely need to avoid the position that says, well, this person is crazy because there is real and he's dealing with something that's not real.
Yeah.
So all we need to do is deal with what's real. Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that the same psychological structures that are alive in him are alive in us. And so if you take a step back and you just carelessly use the word delusion,
yeah,
then there is a manner in which you can also conceptualize us as being delusional. Okay. Mm-hmm. Which is why we need to do away with this type of analysis. What's actually happening is he is subordinating the totality of his manner of looking at the world, which I call the psychic frame. Also, mm-hmm. You can use something like Weltanschauung, which is like worldview.
Yeah. Or Dharma.
Sure. Yeah. The nature of that thing that he has identified himself with.
Yes.
Represses data which occur in his life that are characterized by the property of being indifferent towards his emotions.
Yes. Well, I think it's something like you said, the thing that he's identified with. So he's identified with something. And so this goes into the idea of you'll know them by their fruits.
Yes,
is
correct.
The thing that he's identified with, is it's yeses and it's no's, or is it something else? Within the identity structure that we've constructed in the previous episodes, there is this idea that you're in a relationship with something, and you have to ask yourself, does this thing love you? And so when you're thinking about your identity, part of it is an association with what you've manifested. Out of the set of all the spirits that you could conjure into your being based off your decisions and the memory that holds the spirit, out of all of those, whenever you extract one of these things into yourself or to integrate it into yourself, then it is alive. Whenever you say, I am a scientist, I am whatever,
you are an avatar for it.
You are an avatar. You embody the spirit. It lives in you. It now has life because you have let it in. If that thing exists only based off of your unconscious of being unaware of facts, then it will encourage you to avoid facts that threaten its existence. And so it gets to continue existing, but now you have to function through the world, not being able to differentiate reality. And this is not something that is necessarily subsumes your entire being. It could just be associated with a set of things that are particularly associated with the spirit that wants to continue existing. And so you're right. I'm glad that you corrected me, because I do not think this person is some sort of delusional monster. But I do think that even through the conversation, you can tell that they're not functioning out of something that's allowing them to see clearly. And I say this because, like, halfway through the conversation, he says something like, you guys are claiming that unless someone agrees with your definition of spirit, then they are unethical if they do that. And he says that says more about you than it does them. And at that point, it's like that's the exact opposite thing that we have said. The exact opposite. And so the fact that you have said this shows that you aren't listening. You're not functioning out of a space of differentiation and comprehension. You're functioning out of some other thing that has fed you this information that this is what we're saying, when it's the exact opposite of what we're saying. And all of that is said after you made claims that we have no idea what we're talking about. So you know that those previous claims are coming from someone who actually doesn't know what we're saying, but yet he's making these strong affirmative claims about what we're doing prior to even be able to comprehend what we're doing.
Yeah. So there are many things here. The first thing that I want to say is this is because the mechanism of projection is a fundamental mechanism that mediates all psychic life in everybody. Mm-hmm. Okay. The other thing that I need to say is, in a sense, you don't really have a choice about the fact that you're going to subordinate yourself to some identity.
Yeah.
You don't have a choice about that. But you can subordinate yourself to identities which are not consuming. Mm-hmm. This is the conceptualization of sacred and profane, or good and evil. If you can identify yourself with anything, you might as well identify yourself with Christ.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, the audience will forgive us. I'm using this as a canonical example. You should be able to substitute in any avatar of any archetypal structure that will do what I'm about to say Christ does. And the reason why I say that is because if Christ is the hero of the West, for example, then that means that to be the hero of the West necessarily means that you put yourself in service to others. Like, this is what it means when he washes his disciples' feet. This is what I'm saying is that, like, you don't really have a choice of what you choose to identify with, okay? But you can choose to identify with something that is Cain-like or devilish or evil or consumptive or destructive or resentful or hateful.
Yes.
Or you can identify with something that's loving, that's charitable, that's serving, that views itself as both strong and responsible for the state of affairs of its own life, as well as the life of those around it.
And I think that at the core, to be able to do that, you must subordinate yourself to truth. Like, you must want to know what is true and be aligned with it as much as possible.
Yes. And this is why, and this exactly harkens back to the conversation we were having just before we started recording, which is why having a purely masculine space that has been sanctified is so essential for all humanity, because that is the only place out of which this realization of reality of what it means to be a divinely good human can come. It's literally the only place. And the reason why I say it's literally the only place is because what we are doing is we are talking about the coarsest or the minimal psychological structure necessary that is transcendentally characterized by the property of being good. what that means is that every single symbol that structure generates exhibits the property of being a hero, or exhibits the property of being divine, because the nature of that thing is that it is the generator of being divine or good or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the generator of that thing, and it is so for all time. Like by hypothesis, that thing does not change in time. The particular way that it expresses itself changes as a function of time. That's definitely true. Like that's another reason why Christ is so important, is because he proves the transient representation. God goes from being disembodied to embodied. God has a temporal realization of himself.
Yeah.
Okay. But the structure that he represents when he comes into the world is a structure that we are all endowed with, that has nothing to do with which particular human being we are referring to. This is the meaning of being endowed with the Holy Spirit. Okay. So the details of what it looks like to be of this sort of person changes depending on the culture, depending upon the time, depending upon the society. But the fact that we are endowed with a fundamental intuition of how to access that space does not.
Yeah. So there's a lot said there. I don't know how well our audience will be familiar with, especially with our definition of masculine and feminine, and also with Christianity per se, so that they can be able to sort through that. But one thing I wanted to tie this back to is you're talking about how Christ is the generator of, basically like the noble spirit that is aligned with truth, that is loving, that, is sacrificial. Like if it comes to the point where, there is a spirit inside of you, based off to how we've defined spirit throughout this podcast, there is some sort of memory, there's something in you that it has subconscious or conscious capacity to affect your behavior.
Yes.
And so as you grow and change as a person, there comes times to shed certain attachments to an identity. So you're basically going within yourself and saying, all right, it's time to die that thing in you, something that is loving and righteous and actually cares about you, goes, you know what? You're right. It is time to die. I've served my purpose. If I continue existing in the way that I exist, then I will be detrimental to you and every other spirit that that is in relationship, that forms your unique persona. And so I will willingly go. And so the exact opposite is a spirit that says, I don't want to die. Yes. And so it can continue to exist, but it puts everything else in danger. And so
that is pathology.
Yes. And
that's the basis of pathology.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll let you expound on that in a second. But in one of the episodes, I think it's in the first season, was it Minds and Computer Algorithms? I think season 1, episode 4. Oyani and I propose a conceptualization of evil from the perspective of an information processor. And so this show is called the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Why? Bottom turtles are perspective or concepts where all questions of reality can be posed in terms of these concepts. And so as beings of mind, we are information processors. As you said earlier, God came down and made himself temporal. So that temporal nature is associated with being alive and having this way of taking in inputs and then processing data. And so there's always a capacity to interpret any mind, this is the claim I'm making, in terms of the spirit of the information processor. And so if it is the case that we're talking about what spirits you embody and ones that are loving and take care of you versus ones that put you in that do not, then we can think of that in terms of spirits that are within you that put you in a better position or put you in a worse position. Yep. And so you can imagine evil from the perspective of an information processor are spirits within your system that process information and they claim to be doing it for your benefit, but they're actually doing it at your detriment. So there's the essence of betrayal in there. And so this is core to the nature of evil. And this is what you'll get in a pathological spirit, is one that will feed you delusion and lies and all types of stuff so it can continue its existence. And that's what I'm claiming is being observed in that conversation.
Yes, so you're exactly right. I mean, of course, I always have to throw in my little caveat that says the reduction of reality to any particular mode of conceptualization is necessarily incomplete. So do with that what you will. But
we could debate that offline, because I'm sure we could have a full conversation about that. Like I said, the phrase is it's bottom turtles all the way across. So that's part of it, So
no, I understand. I mean, we've had this conversation many times, so I understand your perspective on this. But of course, I think that it's necessarily incomplete. And I mean, like in some sense, my life's work is to prove that that's the case.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you can't do that. It just means that when you make that projection, you necessarily lose something about being that can only be restored when you realize that when you're trying to understand things, that's subordinated to something greater.
Yeah. So we've had this discussion about the spirit, like what you've embodied, and the individual, you can think about all of the modes of being in you that affect your behavior. And whether or not you have created harmony with them is the degree to which they know their role and their place and are servants to something larger. Just almost like you're the president, or that's the consciousness, you're like the president, or like the thing that has been manifested to through the collective sacrifice has been manifested to make decisions for the entire thing.
You're the hero.
You're the hero, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that is the case for an individual, but this process actually extends externally when you make groups of multiple individuals. So when we come together and we create the identity of scientists or physicists, we have a responsibility to act ethically within that space so that we can actually do the will of physics and be subservient to it and all that stuff. So we've discussed that in the previous episodes.
Correct.
And so another aspect of this conversation that I think is a good way to break it down is to break it up in terms of subjective and objective. So there's a part of the conversation that I want to read off and this isn't him talking, this is me talking. So at some point in time during the conversation, I make this statement that when you're trying to comprehend all of the totality of reality, doing it from a purely materialistic, what can be falsified and what can't be falsified is insufficient. It's not enough. And the point
for the exact reason that I said earlier is because when you try to conceptualize being in a purely materialistic way, you've subordinated all of reality to a particular mode of conceptualization, which is necessarily incomplete, which is why it's insufficient. It's why it's insufficient. And so it doesn't matter what you do. Every single time you try to do this, it will be insufficient.
I don't want to deter too far from the thing I was trying to say. Okay. Yeah, because basically I want to set up the idea of the nature of the subjective is that it is hidden. It's something that is beyond what can be merely falsified. Like right now, I cannot falsify the truth of your subjective experience. I can't know whether or not you are actually an automaton. All I can do is observe your behaviors and your actions. And then given the fact that we're both humans, I can make inferences about what you're probably experiencing, but I can't actually experience what you're experiencing. I do not have access to your subjective experience. Yeah. And so if someone comes to a deep truth about something because they have a strong feeling of love for another person, that's not falsifiable. But to say that which is subjective or which is not falsifiable doesn't have the capacity to reveal truth would deny things like falling in love. As a scientist, I can't falsify whether or not someone is experiencing a deep resonance with a loving emotion for somebody. So in other words, I have my subjective experience, you have your subjective experience. And when we come together to make a larger identity, it can't be based off of one person's subjective experience, which no one else has access to.
Yeah, right, exactly. By definition, it's not shared, right?
Yes, it's not shared. And so you can't create objective structure. And this is the whole point of what we've been talking about with identity and ethics, is that when you take the principle, we are made in the image of God, to be that we all have free will, which means that we have something like a subjective essence, a capacity to have a will and to create. And that whenever we enter into an identity with each other, we are sacrificing our subjective freedom to enter into a shared identity or a shared reality. And then that shared reality becomes objective, a shared mental objective object. And this is another thing was talking with this guy, is he kept trying to say that words are totally subjective. And he seemed to think that statements that are made within words that could change means they're not objective. So just because a language that we have now can change over time or is not shared among all people, therefore it's not objective. But if I say something like Bilal Muhammad is the UFC welterweight champion, that is an objective fact. And so what I'm trying to say is that when we're trying to create shared harmony, we can only do it by coming together and finding mutual information that's shared among us for each one of us to respect the other person's subjective freedom. You joined this group of your own free will, and I respect that. And the degree to which someone tries to impose on everybody else their subjective experience, which no one else has access to, is the degree to which you're trying to tyrannize or elevate their divine essence above everybody else's. And I think that this is another aspect of evil as we've defined it, because to do that is to basically not respect the divine presence of everybody else, and it's to violate our first principle of ethics, which is to love God above everything else. And if everyone has this Christ-like spirit, then all of their shared identities, all of their macro identities will be one that, for every identity that points to Shannon, physicist, father, American, whatever, like all these identities that I've entered into, if I'm being perfectly ethical to all of them simultaneously, then to me, that is following in line with Jesus' first principle, love God above everything else. And the degree to which I try to tyrannize any of those identities with my pure subjective is to elevate myself above God. And this is another, and so I'll let Ryan speak, but I want to go through another example of how this person is promoting such a mode of being, which can only create discordance among an identity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all the things you're saying there are spot on. Let me think if I need to, or if I want to add anything.
Well, if not, then I can just go into the example of why it is, like, through that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so since we're basically doing analysis by means of a particular example, I would say that effectively everything that I would want to say we've already said it in previous episodes. We spent all of that time building up the general theory, and now we're just showing how that general theory is presenting itself in the context of this particular example. And so you're just hearkening back to those things. So, I mean, all the qualifications that I've had to add, I've already added. So it's not really useful for me to rehash them.
Sweet. Yeah, so within this conversation, he's the one that brought up gender identity in this conversation. It wasn't me, it was him.
You can go and you can read the comments if you doubt.
Oh, yeah. You can go and read the comments. Yeah, he actually said that in our episode, we claimed that God gave people their gender identity, which is something that we never said. But a particular statement he said that was interesting was, it is a terrible, selfish thing to deny someone their identity. In reference to the idea of, if someone comes to you and says, man can get pregnant, or if a person is pregnant and they're claiming to be a man, to say you're not a man is a very selfish thing to deny their identity. And the reason why that is a violation of ethics, as we've defined it, is implicitly within that statement is actually a desire for power or control over language, which is to say something like, when we come together to make a language, the language only works because there is mutual meaning of a word. So we all know what a book is. And if everybody was like, nope, I'm going to choose book to mean something different, like if book meant something different to every person, then when I use the word, I don't know where it will point your mind in the space of concept. So I can't use it to communicate because I don't know how you will respond to my use of that label, book. And so the degree to which we are coherent and we can actually communicate is the degree to which we sacrifice our freedom to give meaning to a label so that we have shared meaning. So what that means, if that someone comes to you and there is a meaning of a word like man, and up until 10 years ago, you could almost define man based off of that human configuration that cannot get pregnant. It's almost like, by definition, a man is someone who can't get pregnant. And so if someone comes to you and says a man can get pregnant, and if you don't agree with that statement, then you are being selfish and terrible for denying someone their existence, then they're using the language to make a claim. Their characteristics are not consistent with the shared understanding of that word, which means that for me to not be terrible and to respect their identity would be for me to accept their definition of the word man, which is to say that you're trying to change the meaning of the word, like you're trying to change it. And so implicitly within this is the exact same thing he accused us of, which is, if you don't agree with my words or my meaning of a word, then you are bad. And to me, what I'm saying is that is inherently an attempt to wield someone's subjective feelings of something as an objective fact and say, if you don't agree with me, then you are bad.
Yeah. So another way that you'll frequently encounter this within these sorts of conversations is people will make claims, well, language changes all the time.
Yes, this is the number one statement people make.
It's difficult for me to think of a shallower analysis of why phenomenologically language transforms than, well, because it's subordinated to our subjective wills and we can just do whatever the hell we want with it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Because really what's happening when people make those stupid claims is they're saying, well, actually, I want this word to be affiliated with this sense, this internal sense, because it makes me feel good.
Yes. That's essentially it.
It literally doesn't go any deeper than that.
Nope.
And then they do post hoc justification of their attempt at transforming the meaning of a word.
Yes.
By shallow retorts that are usually along the lines of, well, things change.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, things do change, and sometimes they change for the worse.
Yes.
Maybe you shouldn't just go poking things and hoping that it gets better. You spend no time thinking about, well, should we change it this way?
Yeah.
Or why should we change it this way? No, you must not change it that way. If I give you that differential transformation in that direction, then by definition, I cede ground of a realm that I have declared to be sacred. I allow the injection of transformation or change into something that by definition is not supposed to change.
Yes.
Right. And it's not the word man shouldn't change. That's stupid. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if we are trying to use language in a way that allows us to differentiate reality or to converse with one another, right? That is the particular application that we have in mind right now performing this analysis. Then it is necessary that the terms that we have for the sake of the particular conversation be fixed until we can show that a particular term in the generating set needs to have its sense changed because the scope of ideas that it generates is insufficient.
Yeah. In other words, what you're saying is you need to actually make an argument. Language changes over time.
This
is true, but that doesn't mean that all suggestions of changing a word are valid. And it's not just words, it's concepts, it's ideas, it's art, it's every bit of shared information that allows us to have a shared reality has power. It has power for conceptualization. And so these things change based off of creating an argument, convincing others, creating moving art. You have to do some work to convince somebody else. And this is my point, is that when you respect the subjective freedom, the divine essence of other people, then you come and present your idea, and then it gets judged and you accept the judgment. To try to claim you are bad because you don't agree with me is to try to say you agree with me or else. And on top of that, to say something like you're doing something terrible if you're making a moral claim. So this is another aspect of why what this guy's doing is indicative of the mode of being that allows you to be delusional and to harm yourself. Because he's claiming the identity of morals. He's saying something like, I have the objective moral truth. I have the righteous authority to judge you as immoral. That's what he's saying. I have the righteous authority to judge you as immoral because you didn't agree with my definition of a word, and you did not subordinate your own divine freedom to relate to the word. Because the whole point is that, and I think in the next episode we're going to talk about this, is that you and I have a whole structure on how we conceptualize man, woman, masculine, and feminine that isn't just an island of its own. It's incorporated to the entirety of our psychological frames, as you put it, our cognitive schematas. to perturb the meaning of this word is actually an extreme catastrophic event to my spirit, to my soul, and how I understand and conceptualize reality. It's not something you can simply ask me to change. And whenever you come to me and you say something like a man can get pregnant, and if you don't agree, you're bad, you're telling me every time I see a person who is clearly a woman have on a name tag he, him, whatever, his as their preferred pronouns, when I see that, it's like, oh, I have to lie again. I have to lie to myself. That's not how I relate to these words. I'm using these words in a way that's not consistent with my internal subjective understanding. And you might say, well, who's your subjective whatever? It's like, yeah, well, that's the whole point. In ethics, you have to respect people's subjective freedom. And so for me, just like what Dave Chappelle was saying, when you see someone who is claiming to be a woman or claiming to be a man, and you know for a fact that they aren't, then every single time you capitulate to their use of language, you're sacrificing your own freedom, that your own power, you're giving them your power, you're rejecting your own identity, and you are lying to yourself to bolster someone else's sense of identity. So the question is, what is it about your identity that makes you think that I have to subordinate my own sense of self to you? This is perfectly unethical. It's perfectly evil. Like, I don't understand how else to process this other than something like someone has a perception of themselves that is elevated so high above everybody else that they think that they have the right to control everybody's use of language. It's pure madness.
Yes. Yeah. So there was a comment that you made in there about laying your ideas on the altar to be judged by, say, others.
Yeah.
That judgment is only valid insofar as others respect your subjective freedom. So as soon as you bring it to a group of individuals who manifestly demonstrate the fact that they lack that capacity, then their judgment means nothing.
Yes.
Okay.
So they're disconnected from themselves.
And so the people who betray God, when people who betray God effect judgment upon you, the nature of the judgment is inherently invalidated because it's not God who is judging the material that has been presented. It's something else. Just to really, really hammer this home, because some person could come and say, well, you laid your ideas out and this individual came and judged your ideas as insufficient. And in particular, this computer science professor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you naively think, well, I should lay my ideas before everyone, right? Then it seems like, well, you should just change your idea.
Yeah. Your idea was bad. It was flawed. No. Yeah.
No, right? No. Things are so much more complicated than that. As soon as somebody demonstrates that the space out of which he is forming judgments is a space which is characterized by the desire to tyrannize other individuals into his worldview for whatever pathological reason he has, whatever the generator of the pathology is, it doesn't matter. It invalidates the nature of the judgment from the perspective that we are trying to articulate. So from the perspective of a pursuit of and honoring of the notion of truth as such.
Yes. So and I think a simpler example too is just like, so you make food for somebody, they eat it. The reaction that they have in terms of how pleasurable that is, it's not a choice. It either was good to you, it felt good, it was nice, or it wasn't. It tasted good or it was crap. And to tell someone that it was good when it was bad, or that it was bad when it was good, is the sense in which that judgment is invalid and it's not a judgment from God. That's the degree to which it's not a judgment from God. And I want to say this because when we use the words God and stuff, people like this guy in particular can start poo-pooing it. But when you start understanding that there's something about judgments from God that are associated with sincerity, pureness, and that when you are just simply expressing your pure expression to other people, then they can really see who you are. They can really and like, this is what the podcast is meant to be and designed to do. It wants to get to the point where we can do that, where we can just give each other true data. What are you feeling? Speak your truth, But if you're going to speak your truth, you have to listen sincerely, which means that you have to allow your truth to be judged by others, because you could be wrong, you could be delusional. There might be something you didn't think of. And the degree to which we are interacting with each other in this godly sense is the degree to which we can build better models of reality, is the degree to which we can be better creators and live in harmony and create whatever this utopia is, or this maximally harmonious shared identity and a shared reality that is loving. Like, we have to have that. And if you do not have a connection with God, then you can't do this, because you are turning away from the true essence or nature of yourself. And you're allowing the thing that wants to exist at your expense to control how you see reality.
Yes,
and I was reading Exodus. Reading Exodus, and I thought it was interesting that at one point in time, God is telling the Israelites, like, do not mix with these other people who prostitute themselves to their gods. And I think, man, that's a very interesting choice of words, prostitute yourself. And it's something like that. Like, you're giving over something that you, like you said, something that's sacred to you, that you're supposed to hold sacred, and you're giving that up in return for a good feeling. And it's just like, yeah.
There was something that I want to add, but I forget right now what it was that I wanted to say.
Okay. Well, there's one more, before we move on to the next thing, there's one more aspect of this that I want to communicate. And another example from my discussion with him. But if you're ready to move on, we can. Yeah.
No, I don't remember exactly. So you can keep going.
Yeah. So the next example, and this will be the final thing, is we were discussing the idea that a man can get pregnant. And so, this is something that I discussed in the episode, to agree or not to agree. And at the time, I was pretty certain that word had no informational content, but I still thought I got to double check to make sure that I'm correct. And I know that to differentiate what you mean, when I say informational content, I mean like logical content, the ability to distinguish, And so in my conversation with him, I pointed out that word has no logical structure.
Wait, you mean the sentence or a particular word?
Or the sentence, the sentence, the phrase, a man can get pregnant. And he said that I was taking the phrase out of context, and that within their context, it's a perfectly valid phrase.
Which is kind of true, right? So this is, again, going back to what I was...
It's not true.
No. Hold on. Right. Again, it depends on the functional purpose of the use of the language that you are employing.
Yes.
Right. So again, if our goal is to employ language in the context of making sense of reality, then it is not true.
Yes.
But if our goal is to reflect our emotional state, and that sentence is uttered in the context of the realm which is characterized by the goal of reflecting the emotional state, the subjective emotional state, then it's true. But we should be...
I think there's actually issue with that, to be honest.
But, okay, so we can get into that. But I don't think that we should say that in that context it's true, because it cedes ground to the space that says, well, true things can be subjective. No, we shouldn't call it true. It's more like what it's doing is it's accurately reflecting the internal subjective data of the person saying things. But it's not a true thing.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, what I hear when I think about this argument, it sounds similar to me like coming up to someone who wants to be a stand-up comedian and bombs every time they go on stage. And then someone comes up to him and goes, "No, you're totally funny." And it makes them feel good about themselves, but I didn't
say I'm not saying that phrase ought to be employed. I'm saying forget about the people who think this. Take them, put them in a little bubble, and shove them over in the corner.
Mm.
And we're here trying to understand why anyone would ever say such a thing.
Yeah.
Right? Great. If I do that, then I realize the space out of which such an utterance occurs has absolutely nothing to do with trying to make sense of the world, and has everything to do with trying to represent the world in a way that is harmonious with my subjective emotional data. which again is a type of tyranny. That is absolutely true. And also, I agree with you that we shouldn't allow that into the space which is designed to make sense of the world. But
here's my point though. I think the problem with this as a general concept that there's anything true is happening is to try to reflect someone's emotional data, whatever they're feeling.
Has nothing to do.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
To do with the people who want to identify as men and also be pregnant. Has nothing to do with them. Has everything to do with the person who is saying the statement. Like in the case, you have a soft-hearted mother that's going up to the son and saying, "Oh, it's okay that you lost. You did your best." Right? It probably is coming from a place of "I love my child," but it is not coming from a place of "I want to make my child better." It has much more to do with the fact that I feel bad. And the reason why I feel bad is because I'm empathizing with the thing in front of me and assuming that that thing is also feeling bad. And I want my bad feelings to go away. So I'm going to construct some kind of emotional data packet to send to them so that I feel better.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. It has nothing to do. It doesn't have to do. Like, I'm not trying to say what we should do or what they're trying to do is assuage the emotions of the people who they feel are the victims. No. They're trying to assuage themselves. It's a type of emotional or psychological masturbation.
Well, okay. Well, I think the point that the main point that I want to get to, the point is that he was saying something like, I was taking that phrase out of context. And the point is that I used to believe that was also a valid statement. But within his statement, he's saying something like, this person got sex reassignment surgery, or they got a cosmetic surgery, therefore they are literally a man, or something like that. That implicitly means that they have changed the meaning of these words, as we already stated earlier. And this new meaning can now include biological women. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, then what is man? Like, clearly a new concept has been introduced because it allows for men to be pregnant, which is to say a biological woman who gets sex reassignment is literally a man now. And that's why a man can get pregnant. That's why it's valid, supposedly. So when you actually study the language that imbues meaning on the concept of man, the foundation of that is a man is anyone who identifies as a man, or a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman. Now, this is really important because as we've been discussing throughout this podcast and through these series of episodes I've been doing with Ryan, the way that information works is it creates a border. It creates a border of things that are consistent with the information, and then it excludes things that are not consistent. So it actually functions as an exclusionary tool. That's what it does, at least in the way that it can be used to communicate, such that you can understand what I'm saying so that we can have a shared reality. And so when you have a phrase like a man is anyone who identifies as a man, then the criteria to be a man is merely a subjective identification, which means that it has to include all characteristics of anything, man, woman, even, I guess, robots, AI, I don't know. Anything that can have the subjective assertion that they are a man must be treated as such, which means that it has to accept every characteristic, which means that it points to everything equally, which means it points to nothing. It is a black hole as far as objective structure that can mediate communications function. It points to nothing. It creates no border and no barrier. And so the reason why this is important is, as I was saying, subjective experience or someone's subjective experience is hidden only to them. And so when you try to take pure subjective objects or structures, pure subjective things, and use it as the foundation for mediating a shared reality among others, then it's not possible for other people. Well, actually, let me see.
It's only possible for other people to engage in that shared reality in the degree to which their subjective experience harmonizes with the subjective experience that's been imposed by the initial subject.
Yes, it's subordinated. But on top of that, there's no capacity to judge. So going back to what we were saying earlier, there's no capacity to actually make judgments. Like you've removed the capacity of judgment from other people.
Well, okay. So again, if we're speaking, so like we always need to be careful, because if we're speaking about the construction of shared reality and the basis of all of this to make sensical judgments or logical judgments, then your claim is true. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that the individuals are disavowed of affective judging. Like the people that are in this shared space are still going to have emotion.
Yeah.
Right. And their emotional, like they will be at the whim of their emotional whatever at any given instant. Right. So they'll just.
Yeah.
So in that look, so I just want to say in that sense, there is a notion of judgment, but it's certainly not the sort of judgment that allows reality to be created and persist.
Well, yeah, so this is good, because I think that you can actually help me work through this, because I think that now I'm realizing it. Maybe I haven't worked through this in enough detail, and maybe you can help me. So what I'm thinking of is the idea of an axiomatic structure and logical consequences and the association of that with a world, or what could be a shared reality. And so when you have a set of axioms that are stated using some language or whatever, there's some language that exists such that you can state axioms, then you can see the logical consistency between those axioms, such that when you look at consequences of them, each consequence is almost like a logical step or calculation that, if you look at the set of all of them, unfurls the entire world. It's basically, it's an extension of the initial truth that's contained. Yes. And so if you're building off of words like a man is anyone who can get pregnant, or you're building them off of these structures that don't have basically this logical differentiation capacity associated with them, and you're building a world off of that, you're trying to unfurl it. The type of judgment that is required to unfurl a world in this axiomatic way is one that is very causal. It is one that is objective. It is causal. One that is masculine, purely logical, right? So now try to imagine doing that with a structure that has zero logical content in it. And you need other people to come together and live in the world that's associated with these axioms that have no logical structure. It's in that sense, how is it that we can create a world that can actually stand as a true world that can be lived in and embodied when you don't have, you see what I'm trying to say? Yeah, it's almost like you have to enforce.
Well, so
it can't be glued together by something like, I am a divine being that made a logical judgment, and this is logically true, and I can see that. And even if you're here or you're not there, I can see the truth of this world. And this other one, you can't do that.
Correct. That's why the naive attempt at applying the structure that you built in the first case to the second case is totally wrong. Okay. So
that I built specifically. What are you talking about? What do you be more clear? Be more clear in that statement.
I'm saying you specifically just performed a construction.
Yes.
Of two worlds.
Yes.
The first world is based on the inferential closure of a set of axioms that either you write down or that we all agree should hold.
Yes.
Okay. And that these things are written down in such a way as to be compatible so that the logical theory that they generate is coherent and complete. So there is no contradiction contained in that system, and it has nothing to do with you.
Yes.
All right. The second realm that you created is exactly your attempt at trying to conceptualize the nature of the feminine from within a realm which is purely masculine, which is why it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally wrong, which is why I said you don't try, like you can't take their data and import it into this realm, because what you're going to get is a singularity.
But wait, before you continue. But here's my point, though. So here's my point. It's not me that's wrong. Wait. It's not me that's doing that. It is them that is doing that.
I know.
That's my point.
I know.
That's my point.
So hold on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's wrong to import in either direction. Okay. So what you're trying to do in this naive construction, if they're doing it, whoever the fuck is doing it, doesn't matter. Any attempt at importing this into this structure in order to build a structure of the same nature based on like the literal conceptualization of this other space as being constituted from axioms and their inferential closure is absurd.
Yes.
Literally conceptualizing it that way a priori is absurd. Okay? Just like trying to conceptualize the nature of the masculine in the realm of the feminine purely is also absurd. These two things are conjugates of one another. Like they're complementary. You can't they're like orthogonal. They're like, okay, look, it's like you're a vector space and the masculine and the feminine are orthogonal complements. Like they're not in each other. Okay.
I think that, this is something we can discuss much later. But I actually think that they are exactly what you're saying, orthogonal and complement to each other. But to resolve them, there's like a paradox of trying to say they're the same. And there is actually, I think, a solution to that.
There is a solution. They're not the same. The solution is the realization that we are all endowed with the archetypal generators of the masculine and the feminine. Like we have the capacity to know the tone of both. The difference is that depending upon your physiology, you have a greater propensity towards
for one or the other.
Yeah. To illustrate the symbolic structure of one or the other. Okay.
Which is precisely how we define masculine and feminine.
So you abstract out man and woman from masculine and feminine. Okay. So look, there are details. Yes, we don't need to go into them. But the point that I'm trying to make is importing the data of one into the other realm and then assuming that the structure is preserved under that importing is literally wrong, regardless of the direction.
Yes, but this is, I guess, what I'm trying to say. It's something like, for us to have a shared reality, like again, subjective is hidden behind a wall. And so when we come together to create a shared reality, a shared language, it's something like we're sacrificing some subjective freedom to enter into a social contract with each other. And that's how the words I'm saying are objective. We use our subjective resource to make objects that we can come together. And so I'm saying that this process, because we're all these divine subjective beings, that it's necessary to some degree that there is a structure that manifests the spirit of objectivity.
I totally agree.
And what I'm saying is that this definition of man as anyone who identifies as a man precisely does not have the capacity to manifest any objective structure.
I totally agree.
And because of that, when someone comes to me and is presenting an idea, incorporate this idea into yourself. And I analyze it. And I'm like, I don't want to incorporate that into myself. It's a purely subjective thing that makes no it's a purely subjective thing that I don't understand how it can be used to mediate or manifest the objective structure needed to create a coherence that allows everyone to respect other people's subjective experience. And so because of that, I'm saying something like trying to import a purely feminine object and to have it function as the masculine.
That's right.
Trying to do that,
yes, is wrong.
Well, not only is it wrong, but it's almost something like you start to manifest things like, you must agree with this, otherwise you're bad. That's the reason why they have to use that argument. Because there is no other appeal to logic. There is no appeal to something that I can actually evaluate and judge.
That's right.
The only thing is agree or else. Because you can't analyze it as a logical structure with inferences, because it has none. And so what I'm saying is that when you try to do that, use a purely feminine thing to function as the masculine structure, then you're going to get spaces like communism, where you can't say the things that are obviously false. Yep. You can't say anything. You just must listen. And I was listening to and this is what I was trying to get to, and I was listening to the Barry Weiss podcast. I love Barry Weiss and her podcast, with it, Honestly.
Honestly.
Yes. And she wasn't on the episode, but it was two guys. They're both liberal men, who were evaluating why Trump won the election. And at one point, one of them, who is someone who lives in kind of the woke DEI space, like he has good standing in that space. He mentioned something like within that space, people are exhausted because they have to constantly say things that aren't true and they're sick of it. And that's what I'm saying is like when you try to use a purely feminine object as a stand-in for a masculine, then to hold that together requires a use of force or coercion. And that's precisely why the only argument they have is agree with me or you are immoral or you are bad.
That's right.
Which is to say that you have righteous judgment. I am actually judging you with a righteous spirit of morality, which is, if you take it to its actual conclusion, is like claiming to judge you with the righteousness of God. So you are taking the God's name in vain when you do that, which is another violation of ethics. So every last aspect of this construction, like interacting with this person, indicated someone who is willfully subordinating himself to something that needs him to be unaware, delusional to some degree, so that it can continue its existence, because any amount of critiquing or judgment or evaluation of it means it must die.
Yes, that's right.
It is,
and you have no idea. Like when you start to pull that thread, you have no idea how deep it goes.
Yes, exactly.
And the problem is that it probably goes very deep, and it probably, when you start to do that sort of analysis, it starts to take you to places that you don't want to go.
Yes, exactly.
It takes you to places where you learn things about yourself that you wish you never knew.
Yeah.
Because look, when you're identified with an unconscious content, you are necessarily in subordination to your shadow, which means that to analyze it means that you have to start to accept that you have a shadow. Which means that you have to start to accept that there are things about you that you fucking hate.
Yes. And this is the purification process.
And that is part of you. Like, you don't have a choice.
Yes.
And so then the question becomes, well, what the hell do you do then? Right? Because now you're in this space where all you know about yourself is that you're filled with things about yourself that you hate.
Yes.
As a consequence, you hate what and who you are all the way down.
Yes.
So then the question becomes, well, what in God's name do you do then?
Yes.
Well, then you have to find the voice that's inside of you that allows you to have charity for the thing inside of you that says that shit to you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's the part that's really fucking hard. This is why David Goggins says shit like you have to find the voice inside yourself that lets you stand against all those demons when they come up.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's why you need to do that. Right? It's just you. It's just you. There's no one coming to save you. Those voices are going to keep saying the same evil shit to you. You don't have a choice.
And if you talk to any Christian, this is the Spirit of God. That thing, that little voice inside of you that is telling you to like vanquish these things. And when that voice is allowed, then it can judge. And then the purging happens.
Correct.
And then the purging happens. And then you purify yourself. Correct. And then you're reborn.
Correct.
And this is the core of Christianity.
Yeah, that's
this is the core of Christianity. And once you comprehend that I think that the only way to defeat this is by loving it. And this goes back to what it says in Matthew, like however you judge, God will judge you twice as bad. So in other words, if you're going around in the world and you're seeing someone who's functioning out of a shadow, as you were saying at the beginning of this episode, like don't call them delusional for these reasons. If you see someone else doing that and your reaction is to judge them harshly, then if you ever have to encounter that within yourself, then if you really were judging them that harshly, that judgment is going to come on you probably twice as bad. And so when you're confronted with that, you can either turn away from it or you can incorporate it into yourself. And the degree to which you turn away from it is the degree to which you're turning away from God, which is to separate yourself from yourself, which is to not be able to see the truth. And this is how it freaking works. And one thing, and so the thing is that not only is this the prescription in Christianity, but it's also the prescription in Buddhism. there's an episode of the Lotus Underground podcast where MC Owens recites the Saguna Deva Sutra, and in part of his explanation of it, he's talking about the idea in Mahayana Buddhism that the state of equanimity or the state of Buddhahood is found directly in the kleshas, which are the defilements. And what that means is that if you think that the defilements are something other than yourself or something other than the essence, then you can't properly incorporate them, which means that to incorporate them is to see them and think, that's what I am, that's what I do, and then to not hate it, to not judge it, because the degree to which you hate it and judge it is the degree to which you hate yourself.
Correct.
And and that's the more difficult it is to actually contend with them, purify them, and grow.
Correct. Yeah, correct. Yep. Yeah,
this is the nature of evil.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's worth mentioning or inserting a small reference here. Jung also talks about this exact process in Collected Works 12 and 14, also 16. Collected Works 16, you can look at Psychology of the Transference. Collected Works 14 is called Mysterium Conjunctionis. It's a 1,000-page tome that you can go and read if you'd like. And Collected Works 12 is Psychology and Alchemy, in which he does, the first half of the book is actually very interesting. He illustrates this process by analyzing Pauli's dreams. So Wolfgang Pauli was actually a patient of Jung. And then
wow. Interesting.
Yes, yeah.
Only one of the only few people to win 2 Nobel Prizes, right?
Yeah, and then they kept a long correspondence afterwards. Actually, the letters between the two of them are very, very interesting, and that form the basis of many observations that I made as a consequence within that context. But
Wolfgang Pauli is interesting too, because he went through some sort of
when he was 30.
where he believed in vitamin, like he was believing in some vitamin supplement thing that he refused to accept that. I think this is Wolfgang Pauli. Anyway. Speaking of which, I do appreciate your referencing of all the Jung reading that you've done, because one thing that Race guy said was that Jung would be rolling over in his grave at the stuff he's saying. I'm just thinking, dude, I would love for that guy to have to talk to you and have it be filmed. He would be destroyed. It would be horrific. What he's
talking about. Doesn't know anything. It's fine. I mean, for whatever reason, I have found his works to be insanely resonant with my being. So I've read, half of everything he's ever written. I still have to read more of stuff that he's written. I've read basically all of Erich Neumann's stuff too. So,
well, the thing is you gave me this.
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah.
I was reading it in the delivery room when my last child was born, and the doctor came in and asked me.
It's difficult to see it. If you want, you can hold it up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So I still got to finish it, but what I found was extremely profound.
It's a very short, and I think that it's also one of the best places to start. I mean, I remember Jordan Peterson recommended reading Modern Man in Search of a Soul. I tried to read that book. I thought it was actually very bad. Personally.
Interesting.
I thought but whatever, it doesn't matter. One
thing I want to say before, because I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover. It actually went really well. But one thing I want to point out is that this is the nature of evil. This is the nature of sin. And the degree to which these modes of being, this pathology, is within yourself is the degree to which that thing is processing data at your expense for its continued existence. And it's betraying you. And this level of betrayal, this elevating yourself above other people's divine essence, this trying to hold together a world and then project it out and force everyone else to live in it through force. All of this is, I would say, the biblical spirit of Satan. It is evil. It is sin. It is the thing that leads to death. It is the thing that leads to discordance among people. It's the thing that breaks down identity. But the thing is that when you hear evil and you hear Satan, people, I think, always imagine that it's like this huge, like you're sacrificing babies. You're doing something so barbaric or something real. But no, it's far more subtle than that. It's far more subtle. And the way it's dealt with is through love. You have to be able to see that within yourself and see it within others without it corrupting you and allowing you to go into a rage. And it is in Jesus' case, I'm just going to go sacrifice myself, despite the fact. So I will.
Yeah, but we're not Jesus.
No. But if you're a Christian, you're trying to live a Christ-like existence.
Sure.
You're trying to respond to this way in the best way you can. That's consistent with his example and how he showed us to be.
So I want to say one other thing, though. I think one needs to be very, very careful. Look, so out of that space also comes, I think one needs to be very careful here, because if one immerses himself too naively into this perspective of love, then he believes that he is supposed to pull his own teeth out.
Well, I mean, from this conversation, hopefully you understand that that's not what we'd be suggesting. We're like, no,
correct.
No, stop. This is wrong.
Yes. Yeah. Correct. Right. And so it's very, very important that we do not make the mistake of believing that because we are charged with the dictum to love our enemies, that also means that we tolerate or condone the manners in which they manipulate or undermine reality, right?
Yeah.
And it also means that we do not find in ourselves that we are charged with the task of removing evil from within us. We are not charged with the task of removing our evil. Only God can remove our sin. Only Jesus can remove our sin. We cannot remove our own sin. It is not our goal to remove our sin. It is our goal to love that within us which is sinful, so that it ceases to rule over us.
Yes.
And to love one's own sin does not mean to give into it the temptations that it brings before us. It doesn't mean that at all.
Definitely not. But I think the best way to put it is in James. So James is actually probably my favorite book in the Bible. Let's see if I can find it. Hold on.
Oh, mine is John.
Yeah. So James is my favorite, and James chapter 3 is actually my favorite. Let's see. Oh yeah, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapefruit bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. That's it.
Amen.
That's it right there. Yeah. That's how you react to it. Because you can't like the degree to which you see this behavior in other people and it causes you to judge or to have salt water come out of your mouth. It's the degree to which you're not acting Christ-like. You're not, I don't know. You're not creating peace, because in the next part, he's talking about creating peace or being a peacemaker. It's like you're allowing the sin to corrupt you. Basically, it's what it is.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, that's. I think that's it. Is there any last statements that you'd like to make?
I do think that still on the table is a necessary discussion for us to have about why we think that.
What we're doing is scientific.
Yes, I think that that's an absolutely essential discussion, but maybe it needs to go in its own episode.
All right, man. Well, I think that I'm very happy with this. I think that it went really well. And I guess, this whole season's going to end with a discussion on the crucifixion and what that means. And I think that it's very applicable to everything we discussed today.
The crucifixion is the symbol of, I suppose, the archetype of overcoming. So that is its nature. It's infinitely deep.
Okay. So, all right. Well, with that being said, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again to my special guest, Brian Scott, and we'll check you guys out next time. Oh yeah, and if you like this episode and you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to the podcast, like this video, and share it with anybody you know. Stay turtling, my friends. Peace.